let's invite our chair today, Nurazeyan Khalis, Senior Vice President Investments, Khazanah, and she'll be joined by Dato Abdul Rahman Ahmad, Group CEO, CIMB Group Holdings Berhad, Bill Walczak, President and co-founder, Codman Academy Charter School and Chair, Boards of Bunker Hill Community College and Massachusetts Business Alliance for Education, as well as Katrine, author and journalist, Dagens Nyheter. Please welcome our panel speakers.
Okay, so we're here, we're almost at the end after a very intellectually stimulating past 2 days. So I hope everyone in the audience, you've either learned something new, met someone new, or if you haven't done either of them, then I hope you've at least eaten your weight in buffet food outside. Okay, so we're at our final core session on people and leadership, which in the past has really always been my favorite core session at KMF each year, because this is when you get to hear interesting stories and anecdotes about managing people and different ways to lead. I've been told by my predecessors that, I've been told by my predecessors in the past who have moderated the session before, people like Dato Hisham, that all the previous core sessions have really been about hearing about macro and markets, development and growth, and external factors. But this session is really about heart and what it means to be human. So in my current role, I do spend a lot of time thinking about talent development and really what does it take to build the next generation of leaders, not just in Khazanah, but for Malaysia and globally. And as we stand at the precipice of this perfect storm that each of the panel sessions have been talking about and referencing for the past 2 days, I think that we've come to the realization that many of our new leaders and the younger generation who have entered the workforce less than 10 years ago have yet to actually experience an economic downturn. Thus, the theme for this panel session, named or titled, "Oh Captain, My Captain, the Trials and Tribulations of Leadership in Steering Through a Perfect Storm," which I think will offer some interesting food for thought, not just for our current leaders, but also the next generation of leaders. So today, we have a wonderfully diverse panel of speakers it's really a cross-section of leaders in their own respective fields. And judging from this panel, I think most of us have lived through at least one economic downturn, maybe 2, possibly 3. So maybe I'll start off with giving a short introduction about each of our panel members. So obviously we have Dato Rahman, a seasoned and well-known corporate figure in Malaysia, and is currently CEO of CIMB Group, one of the largest banking institutions in Southeast Asia. And then I'm sure everyone who joined Nick's session earlier today knows Katrine Marcal, who spoke earlier today, and is a Swedish journalist I'm going to try to say this correctly, Katrine, Dagens Nyheter.
Perfect.
Sweden's most widely distributed daily. I'm sure all of you by now would have picked up her book outside. I'm sure it's probably sold out, but really is quite a provocative book titled Mother Invention, How Good Ideas Get Ignored in an Economy Built for Men. And finally, we have Bill, who obviously was in the previous session, who spoke earlier today and is a seasoned and well-respected community leader. Okay, so maybe I'd like to kick off this session, and I think, it's a session on people and leadership, and I'd really think that it would be deeply interesting for the audience to hear about each of your respective leadership journeys and how it's taken to you to where you are today. So, Dato Rahman, if I may, you've had several CEO roles over the past 2 decades, and you were actually appointed to your first CEO role in your early 30s, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe you could share with us, how did you develop your leadership style from an early age, and what were the key influences and experiences that shaped that?
Thank you. First, thank you very much for inviting me to the KMF today. Very pleased, and it's a real privilege to be on the panel to talk about leadership. I'll try to give a local perspective since I think my other co-panelists will probably give the global perspective. So as mentioned by you, I was extremely fortunate to be a CEO at a very young age. I have to thank Tan Sri No here. Obviously, Tan Sri Sharil and I were appointed, I think, when we were 32. He was 30, I was 32 and he was 31. And when, I guess we were informed about our appointment to lead Malaysian Resources Corporation Berhad, MRCB, and obviously we went to our office. It's a grand office, you know, a special elevator, etc., and all that. And obviously after we reached there, we were then informed about the issue of MRCB. At that point of time, MRCB was facing, and this was just after the Asian financial crisis. So the issue was that really about debt, about problems, etc. So after we were briefed, and then we looked at each other and said, what do we do next? Obviously, we were 32, 31, never ran, I guess, an organization. Our biggest team was only 6 people, I guess, at that point of time in Dana Harta. And obviously, you know, MRCB had like more than maybe 6,000 staff. So the first thing that we did, I guess, after looking at each other was went to a bookshop. And we actually went out and bought a book. I'm not sure whether some of you still remember it, but at that point of time, the most popular business book was Jack Welch, Straight from the Gut. So Shari and I actually went out to the shop and basically bought the book and read the book and said, okay, this is how, I guess, leaders supposed to behave and what's supposed to be done. So I was obviously very inspired by Jack Welch and the focus, etc. You know, that very sad to read that since then, GE, I think, has fallen from grace. There's another book called Lights Out Now, which I just finished reading, which talk about what were the issues at GE. But that's how, I guess, we started off. And since then, I think I've been very, very fortunate to learn from the leaders that I've worked with. And most of them are here today, you know, from, of course, Tan Sri Azman Yahya to Tan Sri Raja Arshad, Tan Sri Wahid Omar, who was the chairman for me at PNB, and after that, of course, Tan Sri Zati. But I guess my biggest, I guess, influence in terms of own leadership style was really trying to tackle what I believe is the larger Malaysia issue, which I believe, you know, falls into what I think Dato Hisham Hamdan highlighted yesterday on what I call execution or outcome. So my belief has always been that the task for the leaders is really to bring meaningful outcome, whether it's a transformation, whether it's a certain part into their organization. And delivering outcome really, I guess, shape the way that, you know, I've helped manage various organizations, whether it was MRCB, Media Prima, down to Equinas, down to PNB, and obviously now at CIMB. And with that, really understanding why certain organization can deliver outcome or can execute relative to organization that's not able to actually to what I call deliver results. So the focus has always been thinking about, and my belief has always been to deliver that, and particularly in large organization, you really got to be very clear in your mind what is the issues behind any organization that's facing it at any particular point of time. And looking back and really understanding then what defines success. And that's very, very important. I think to deliver results or deliver outcome, I think defining success is extremely important. And then understanding what are the strategic drivers behind in order to deliver the outcome that you actually set. And then obviously developing the strategy. But after that, key to me has always been about focusing on the execution and being very, very granular in terms of what drives the results. So that has been, I guess, my leadership philosophy since I guess, you know, running different organizations and making sure that the impact that any leaders basically gets done. Maybe I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dato, for sharing that. And maybe if I can challenge you a little bit on some of the things that you talked about. So you talked about, you know, like Jack Welch and sort of the GE model of leadership was quite a big influence to you, especially early on in your career. Do you think that's still a relevant leadership model today as you're dealing with like a younger generation of leaders?
Well, Jack Watch theory was basically for conglomerate. There was a case for conglomerate. Now I think it's very difficult to actually to think about the case for conglomerate. I think everybody agreed that focus is extremely important, and that I think probably have, you know, my view of it as basically has been shaped by that, meaning having clear focus in what any organization needs to look at. Over time, I think the key, I know I go back to probably in the Malaysia context, the focus on, I call it execution and delivering real and defining the real results probably still remain understated. Malaysia we love our plan. We love our vision. We love our plans. We love our 5-year blueprint. But I believe if the young leaders, particularly any leaders coming through, we spend more time figuring out what does it take to deliver the outcome that we want to actually to do, I think we'll probably be in a much, much better position.
Okay, thank you very much, Dato. Okay, so now we'll move on to Katrine. So Katrine, I think Nick, listed out or rattled off a number of your accolades, right? You were one of BBC's 100 Women in 2015. You're an award-winning author. Your books have been translated in more than 20 languages, and you even won praise for your book from Margaret Atwood, which to me is quite a feat.
Me too.
So maybe you could talk us through your leadership journey. Like, how did you your leadership journey and trajectory within the media industry as a journalist, and now as sort of a thought leader in feminist economics?
Yeah. Well, I came out as a new journalist, started doing financial news in Sweden exactly when the global financial crisis hit, sort of in 2007. It really started in Europe, and found myself sort of trying to write about this global economy that was suddenly, how can an American investment bank make, a Swedish automobile maker like Saab go bankrupt, and got very interested in these things. And at the same time, I discovered, which I think many women in this field discover, which is that sort of financial news and sort of the world of economics is very male dominated. And my kind of a real sort of wake-up call for me when it comes to those things was I was set to interview the Nobel Prize winners in economics a particular year, and it was in the old town of Stockholm, and it was snowing outside, you can imagine. And it was one of these tricky years when they shared the prize between 3 people, and they really hated each other. So it was all these challenges of sort of not having them in the same room at the same time. And so they had to come down for the interviews one at a time. And I'll never forget, sort of one of them came down, I was sort of sat there with my questions, and I had, prepared for weeks, and he just comes down and he takes one look at me and he says, "So who wrote your questions?" Because it was just unthinkable that, I would have done that myself. And obviously I didn't have a good answer. So all of these things, and then I started thinking about, that financial crisis in terms of, feminist economics, and that a lot of the things that were said about the limitations of the type of economic thinking that contributed to the crash of 2008, 2009, this sort of belief in efficient markets always, how that tied into with a lot of thinking from feminist economists. And I guess that's when I decided to to try to write something about that. And I wrote my first book which is called Who Cooked Adam Smith's Dinner, which is on feminist economics and in Swedish. And bit by bit, that kind of book sort of took me out into the world. So for me, it's not so much been. I'm not so much been leading, my book's been sort of leading me out into all sorts of tricky situations, like having to speak on a stage, and, so the book forcing you. But I am for me, it's, and I've been leading people at newspapers and newspaper organizations and these type of things, but for me, it really is about a mission, which, attaching yourself to this larger mission, which for me is, I think, has a lot to do with Professor Ha-Yung Chung was talking about in his keynote yesterday about economics being the language of power in the world. And for me, sort of encouraging women to speak that language is sort of why I do what I do, because I think it's incredibly important for the whole world to sort of have women engage with sort of these large forces that shape our world, and being able to speak this language and not being afraid to speak this language and speaking the truth in this language. And then I think particularly with, you know, the challenges we have in front of us now. You said Margaret Atwood. I know she doesn't like to talk about climate change. She talks about it as everything change. And I think that's very accurate, because I think this is something that's changing everything. You know, and that's what it is, you know, it is about for me. And I don't, you know, for me, sort of leadership is through writing words on paper and then giving it to my agent who does stuff with it. But that is, you know, it's a privilege. And I don't actually like the term thought leader. You know, it just feels really kind of Silicon Valley and sort of a bit macho in a wrong way, but you know, if people, obviously it's a leadership, it's a way to lead as well, and you know, and I try to be good at it, or as good as I can. Yeah.
Do you have an alternate phrase that you could suggest if it's not thought leader?
I mean, writer, you know, people think it's so old-fashioned, right? But you know, I think it's the
truth.
Sorry?
Yeah, it's the truth,
yeah. But I mean, you know, I've come to terms with the term thought leader. I have, but I just think that the term thought leader requires more of you than sort of one TED talk, right?
Yes.
You know, I think there needs to be. We throw it around a bit too easily, I think.
Completely. You know, I thought it was quite interesting how you brought up that that underhanded comment, like where they asked you, "Did you actually write your notes?" Right?
Yeah.
And I think. And I can speak as a woman, and I'm sure many women in this room can relate that, you know, when you come across situations where you get these underhanded comments where you're questioned for your ability purely based on being a woman, it eats into you a little bit, right?
It does eat into you, definitely. But it can also, it can also spur you on, I guess.
Yes,
and that's
exactly.
what it needs to do.
Exactly.
But, yeah. You never have the perfect comeback.
Exactly.
In the moment, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you, Katrine. Okay, so moving on to Bill, I think you talked a lot about the regeneration and community work that you did in Codman Square, which is a multicultural community similar to Malaysia. So maybe, Bill, you can share with us some of your experiences and how it shaped your leadership journey in the community work that you do.
Okay. Although I do share some of the thought processes of my co-presenters, especially regarding mission and regarding defining success, my story is just totally different. And a lot of it was random things that happened to me. I can tell you that we were all, to a certain degree, products of our times. And my time as a baby boomer was the time of radical change in America, you know, hope for a different kind of future. And so, you know, growing up, although I was a product of working class parents, both of my parents worked in factories. I grew up in New Jersey, you know, famous from the Sopranos, if you saw that. But in any case, I grew up in Jersey, and but went to a high school that was very much focused around social justice issues. It was a Catholic boys' school. And I can tell you that, you know, I went to Vietnam War protests pretty regularly. I also participated in civil rights activities. And my goal growing up was not anything particular other than I wanted to try to change the world and make it a better place. From there, it gets even weirder. I wound up coming up to Boston because I had a scholarship to go to college. And left New Jersey. In my first couple of weeks there, I was hitchhiking and I got picked up by somebody who I wound up getting married to.
Good work.
Some months later. She died about 6 years ago. We were married for 43 years. But in any case, she picked me up hitchhiking, and wound up, she was moving into an apartment. I was, trying to be really nice. I helped her move some furniture in. She invited me back to for an apartment warming party, and then we started dating. But our dates were going out and helping to organize the lettuce boycott for the United Farm Workers Union, Cesar Chavez. And so we would stand in front of grocery stores and ask people not to buy iceberg lettuce. And then at some point in the fall, I was asked if I wanted to go out west and help organize the boycott out in Denver. I told my girlfriend that I was going to do that. She said, "Oh, I'll join you." And I said, "Oh, well, let's get married." I'm not kidding. That's how it happened. So we got married and moved out to Denver, Colorado, where we helped organize the lettuce boycott. I gave up my full scholarship. About 8 months later, we arrived back in Boston and moved into Codman Square, which was a neighborhood that was experiencing the absolute worst devastation that could happen in an American city, including riots, including fires. There were so many fires in Codman Square that on average in the mid-1970s, there was one house fire burning per day during the mid-1970s in our neighborhood, because basically anybody who was middle class moved out to the suburbs and left just poor people in the city. The housing values plummeted to zero. So I was working as a spray painter by this time because I had given up my scholarship, and I wound up going to community meetings. At one of the community meetings, it was announced that the local library was going to be closed because the city was actually in the process of trying to avoid bankruptcy because it had lost 250,000 people in the previous 25 years, and so the property tax revenue was way down. And people started panicking because everything burned. Anything that was abandoned burned. I wound up getting into a discussion about starting a community health center, which were brand new in the city of Boston in those days. So to shut me up probably, because I was only 20 years old, or actually 19 at the time, I was appointed the chair of the committee to start a community health center at I wound up, when we incorporated, I was 20 years old. Thereby beginning a career in healthcare that I had no knowledge of whatsoever at the time. But because we wound up getting in a pitched battle with the city government at the time to try to get this abandoned building and turn it into a health center, I wound up becoming the executive director because it took 4 years and I learned a hell of a lot about health, providing healthcare at a community level. So I mean, that's my story. I wound up being a CEO at age essentially 20. The place opened up a few years later, and I had to grow the place. If nothing else, I'm an entrepreneur, and was able to grow the place very, very substantially over the next few years to 25,000 individuals with 150,000 visits, but recognizing the fact that healthcare just doesn't do it in terms of really low-income communities in crisis. That's how we wound up deciding to do other things. It wasn't me. I mean, really, I was just a guy that knew how to get things done. Other people came to me with ideas and said, "Why don't we do this?" The woman who was my now wife, who I married, although we met a really long time ago, she came to me because I was known to be able to, get things done, and said, "I got this idea for starting a school inside of a health center, community health center." And I said, "Let's do it." Because I often said, "Let's do it." And that's why I had a reputation for being an innovator, which resulted in, if you were at the previous one, being able to get the grocery store in and a fitness center for women and all sorts of different things that came to Codman Square because of its reputation for being an innovation center. And that's something that continues to this day. So for me, it was all about growing. And what I decided was that I was too stupid to be able to figure all this stuff out. So what I was going to do is just be quiet and listen to other people and work really hard and take the minutes of meetings and all that. And that established my credibility in our community, which was a very divided community by race. It was actually, there was a main street, and on one side it was black, and on the other side it was white. And when Boston busing started in 1975, all hell broke loose. So it was a really difficult time. And that's probably why I wound up in the position I was in, because desperate times result in desperate decisions, and the decision was, hey, let's let Walczak do it. So on that regard, that was my journey, and I wound up staying there for 36 years. For 42 years, I was CEO of healthcare institutions, despite having eventually got a bachelor's degree in history from the University of Massachusetts, Boston, which took me about 7 or 8 years to get. But anyway, that's a different story from CEO of a financial institution or being a journalist, although I always loved journalism, and now as a retiree, I write a column for my local newspaper.
Right. I guess what my takeaway from that is that not every leadership journey is linear, and what you think that what you're actually meant to do in the future might not necessarily have anything related to what you're doing today, right? So, okay, thank you very much, Bill, for sharing that. Okay, so I'm going to move on to my next question. I'd like to shift our focus a little bit and look back and reflect a little bit on the last 3 years as the world emerges from a global pandemic, right? And what I'd like to talk about is, what are the difficult leadership choices that we've had to make in a time of a health crisis, right? And what kind of leadership style do you think that is needed to deal with some of the issues and the themes that have come out of a global pandemic? Things like the greater need to invest in mental health, or the impact on certain social groups, children, women, where the incidence of domestic violence increased, and lower income groups, and obviously a widening income disparity as well. So maybe we can circle back to Dato Rahman. Obviously, helming a financial institution during a global pandemic must have had its own challenges. So what are some of your reflections that you've learned over those past 3 years?
Thank you. I joined CIMB in the midst of the pandemic. So I joined CIMB in June 2020. And that was very challenging. And the biggest challenge at that point of time was not being able to have that physical interaction, right? And CIMB is an 5th largest bank in ASEAN. Operations not only in Malaysia, obviously, whereby we are the number 2 bank in Indonesia, in Singapore, in Thailand. So literally, I had to learn how to actually help run an organization without literally meeting people physically. And that's never, or at least in my experience, I've never done that before. And that was tough, because obviously, mentioning about my focus was really, and CIMB entering into that, obviously being a financial institution, was facing a number of challenges. Not because of the COVID, because of the impact it has in terms of people's ability to pay, but also on our own challenge, whereby the key challenge has been what I call the underlagging in terms of creation of shareholder value. So tackling that, and managing, or trying to actually to manage it in an environment whereby you're not able to actually to meet people and interact apart from using virtual, to me was an extremely difficult, or had to adjust my own leadership style. And what does that mean? And looking back effectively over the last 2 years, is that what it meant that I had to change is really had to focus on that, I call it that broader purpose. I tend to probably in the past underplay that so-called, I call it the softer issue of leadership. It's all about execution, etc., and all that. But once you're not able to actually to, I guess, spend time, etc., and all that, the key, you really need to define the so-called have the purpose. And you need people to be motivated despite staying at home, despite the difficulty of not being able to interact, for them to be very, very clear what needs to actually to be delivered. So having that larger social purpose, I feel has been extremely important, and what I had to personally adjust in terms of my own style on that. The second, I tend to like, really trying to actually to go and, I guess, do it or execute it, involved in a very, very detailed manner. In a COVID environment where you're not able to, your reliance on your own leaders have become extremely important. So again, I think we had to actually to really spend a lot of time in terms of looking at our culture, our values, and spending time. Because you need to actually to be able to create the environment whereby people who now in a part only deal effectively with their leaders, they need to work happily or wanting to actually to work with the leaders. So these two are, I believe, probably is the biggest adjustment in terms of style that had to be done probably in an organization. You need to actually to be able to inspire. You need to be able to really make the environment that people work with is a great environment. And I'm sure you know financial institutions probably not the best in terms of the environment. It's always about the results or it's about compensation. But having that larger purpose, that creating a more empathetic environment, more understanding environment became extremely important. And the last part of it is more towards what actually you mentioned, whereby I think we had to actually to adjust now that I think we are out of pandemic because things have changed with the teams that you talk about. People want or likes that work flexibility. People like some people don't want to actually to work anymore and they resign. So the so-called team about great resignation, working in an environment whereby you need to manage attrition, but also recruit well and recruit fast. All of that, I think, has become extremely important. So we spend a lot of time, and for CIMB, we can say that we try to accommodate that so-called flexibility. I know certain financial institutions in the US have decided, no, everybody has to come back to work, etc. So we try to really allow or accommodate that flexible arrangement that people want. Investing effectively in terms of mental health. I think we partner with Naluri, one of the local part, to actually to really make sure that there are a platform for people to actually to share their issues or their stress in a very, very private and confidential manner, and really allowing, spending time. So much so, I think building in terms of our own performance evaluation about values. That values probably outweigh, I call it, delivery in terms of results. I think so these are probably the 3-4 adjustments that personally I had to make, as well as CIMB as an organization had to make in order for us to, I call it, to thrive in the current, I call it, environment.
Right. And hopefully some of those new ways of leading have remained sticky, right, as you said, as we return back into the office, right? Okay, so I'd like to circle back to Katrine. So actually, I've been thinking about this for a while because I follow you on Instagram. And so you had posted a very interesting or provocative post where you said that, this whole narrative that came out during the pandemic about how countries that were led by women, heads of governments, did relatively better than other countries that weren't led by women or led by men, right? And you did mention that it was a slightly problematic narrative. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Why is that problematic?
Well, firstly, it turned out not to be true, right? So,
yes.
Because when that narrative was out, the pandemic was far from over. And then when you go back to it a year later, that wasn't the case. But I do think it's a very typical narrative when it comes to women and leadership. And so, I mean, now we're talking, this session is steering our way through a, perfect storm.
Yeah.
And there is a theme when it comes to women in leadership that whenever there's like a really big mess, that's when we kind of decide, okay, we're going to call the women. It's true, right? and I think that is slightly problematic.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw it in finance, right? 2008, 2009. Okay, if Lehman Brothers had been Lehman Sisters, this crisis wouldn't have happened. And then we saw after, and I don't even like that statement, it's Christine Lagarde, because it's also, what does that even mean? For Lehman Brothers to have been Lehman Sisters, we would have had to have 2,000 years of sort of history being different. It just becomes, I don't know. Anyway, but and then after that crisis, suddenly women started raising in finance, and and that's great. So I live in the UK, and I don't want to get into that whole food discussion again that we had this morning.
Let's not talk about that.
But it's a country, and they're very proud now. They've had their third prime minister, right? We'll see how long she lasts. Mrs. Truss, but And they're very proud, but if you look at it, so it's Margaret Thatcher, it's Theresa May, and it's Liz Truss, and they've all come in at like the real sort of brink of, huge crisis that, so you had the economic problems of the 70s that nobody sort of managed to solve, and then, okay, let's get Thatcher in. Then Theresa May was Brexit. Nobody knew how to negotiate this divorce from the EU. Okay, let's get a woman. And then Liz Truss is the same. And I'm I don't mean this, but it's a pattern. It's sort of women are allowed to lead when it's about cleaning up a mess that men made. And
I think we can all relate, right?
And it's not good enough. And I think the type of leader that women are allowed to be, you're allowed to be very competent, you're allowed to be very good at cleaning up messes, you're allowed all of these things. But I want the female kind of Steve Jobs type of leader. That sort of really visionary innovation. This is my vision. I'm going to women are not allowed to be like that yet, and I think that's problematic. And I think the whole pandemic leadership theme was interesting that it also had, because suddenly it was about health, it was about people dying, it was about people being sick, and then it's also this, oh yeah, women are good at this, right? Let's run to mummy. And it was like we wanted to believe in this narrative that, of course, female leaders were better in a health crisis. And they were good, they were bad, they did well in one phase of the pandemic, they did, not so well in another phase of the pandemic. But I think what we should learn from that, how seduced we were by that narrative, is that firstly, I think women, we need to have a much more, not just a one-dimensional discussion about female leadership. And also women, it shouldn't just have to be after a big mess that women are sort of allowed in or we call on women. And I think we need to be conscious of that. It's almost like a bias we have. And I thought it was just interesting, and I think the pandemic really, really showed us that. And it's allowing women to be, just like in literature or, fiction, that, allowing women to be complex characters is it's hard. It's still a challenge. Women are so often reduced to one thing. Yeah. And it's the same in leadership or when we look at candidates and so on. So it's about that, I think.
Yeah, well, women can do more than fix things.
Women can do a lot more than fix things, yeah. And historically, women have done a lot more than fixing things.
Okay, then thank you so much, Katrine, for sharing your thoughts on that. So now moving on to Bill, right? We're talking about community leadership. And one of the things that came up during the pandemic in Malaysia was this whole concept of kita jaga kita, which is translated as we take care of each other. And so one of the amazing things that we witnessed in Malaysia were, communities independently mobilizing and helping people, whether it's donations, volunteer work, putting together care packs, and that really independent, mobilization within the community to help those in need. So what kind of leadership, or how has leadership had to evolve during the pandemic to help support communities? Like, what were your observations on that?
Well, I can tell you that, well, first of all, I want to say that it's absolutely true. As a person who worked in the healthcare field, and therefore with a huge majority of women, women are the people that do the work in the healthcare system. And they work really well, and I, could never have done the stuff that I did without the support of almost, I would say, 80% female staff. So I totally agree with you, but I hope that these things are shifting. Yep. My own situation was I left when I realized, Cobham Square, when I realized that my number two, who was chief operating officer, an African-American woman, was likely to wind up at another place as the CEO, and I realized that it would have been a really bad thing to lose her. She was a natural leader, even though she didn't recognize it. And so one of the things that prompted me to leave Codman Square was the fact that I had a number two, and that number two was going to be great. And she has been. She's been great. So, but anyway, but overall, in terms of community and COVID, yeah, I mean, it was really complicated in the city of Boston. There were other areas, like in Chelsea, Massachusetts, where a Latinx group really kind of took over the town, or the city. and started providing all sorts of services, including food and all sorts of things, because it had the highest rate of COVID infection in the entire state. And it was really a nonprofit, an NGO group that really took that over, the responsibility. At Codman Square, it was interesting because the school, because it is so focused on health, being inside of a health center, has 2 chefs. I mean, this is all poor children, all poor BIPOC children. But we actually Meg decided that this is so important that they have good nutrition that we would have a chef for each of the schools, like the high school and then for the K-8 school. And so, but rather, because the students weren't there, rather than like lay them off or say, you know, don't come in, we decided to have them cook for the families. And so we had delivered this mechanism for getting food, cooked food from these chefs to several hundred families in there to make sure that that nutrition continued and that people didn't kind of just go into junk food for that. But there were other such efforts. At the health center, you know, providing food, food pantries opening up, Daily Table, the place that I mentioned in my earlier thing, was delivering food to several thousand families in the Dorchester area by adding this whole service to the delivery mechanism for it. So all sorts of things. People came together on it, and it was actually a wonderful thing to see. The crime rate actually went down, and that was an interesting phenomenon as well. And it seemed as though that, you know, people thought, well, you know, kind of all in this together, and it's really scary. So let's not make anything worse.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think what we saw is not just in Malaysia. Obviously, communities pulling together all over the world, right, to get through the pandemic. Okay, so now moving on, we talked a little bit about the past 3 years. Let's focus on the present now and the growing conversation on diversity, or the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Inclusivity, or DEI, and the importance in leadership, as well as really key decision-making bodies, whether it's corporates, governments, non-government organizations, right? And just as an aside, I'd just like to give a shout out to the KMF organizing team this year, because they're really walking the DEI talk. I don't know if you've noticed over the past 2 days, with my fellow colleagues, female colleagues, we've represented 50% of all the introducers and moderators this year, which is something to note. So great job, Nick. Okay, so the question I'd like to pose to our panelists is, how have you observed firsthand the benefits of inclusive leadership? And it can touch many different types of diversity or inclusiveness, right? In terms of achieving, you know, your common and shared goals. And what do you believe are sort of the perils of not having inclusive leadership going forward? And how might that hurt us on a micro level, but also macro level globally? So first, I'd like to call on Katrine first. Okay. I think you have a lot of things to share. You know, I read your book the other day in bed, and every single chapter I went through, I was just like, yes, this is just so right. And then I was kicked out of the bedroom by my husband because it was making so much noise. But yeah, I mean, maybe you'd like to share some of the stories about the importance of inclusivity.
So diversity, inclusivity, obviously there's all these other, all aspects of it. So I guess I'm gonna speak about women and innovation, which is what my latest book, Mother of Invention, is about. And it's sort of using stories from, you know, why didn't we get wheels on suitcases until 1972, to, you know, why were electric cars marketed to women, and that then causing them not to get sort of the type of investment they should have gotten, and so on, to sort of, I guess, give people, through stories, an understanding or a sense of how much is actually at stake if we don't do this work. Because I think, and what I particularly want to do, because I think we still, in a way, tend to think of things like diversity and inclusion as in some way sort of soft, you know? So that's why I wanted to do a book which brought it together with what we think of as really hard, which is, you know, technological development is what I talk about in the book. And I was looking for stories that showed how our failure to do this sort of diversion and inclusivity when it comes to women actually held technological development back. Because I think that's counterintuitive to how many people think. We don't think about how these sort of soft things, lack of gender equality, can actually hold back something that we think of as, inevitable and sort of almost pushing the whole economy and everything in front of itself, which is technology. So that's why that's the theme of the book, showing that yes, we are that stupid. And often we insist on sort of upholding gender roles at the expense of, everything else, even making money. And that's the book. But I also think more from a more practical leadership perspective, I do think that innovation is one of the lowest hanging fruits when you do diversity and inclusion properly. Because it is... I think all of us understand on some level that, okay, we want new ideas. New ideas happen when different perspectives meet. But if you look at, look within a company about, who's doing innovation, or you look in any economy in the world, who gets money to do innovation, it's not diversity and inclusivity there. It's often the opposite. And often these sort of new parts of the innovation economy, can often have bigger gender equality problems than more traditional sectors of the economy. And so what do we do? In the book I talk about sort of the bigger things we do, but it's also interesting that as an individual leader, you can actually do a lot to create more innovative teams. And the research is quite clear. So for example, leaders who they just made sure, quite a simple thing, that men and women spoke the same amount of time in meetings, were shown to create more innovative groups. And then the second thing, which I find even more interesting, leaders who showed in front of the whole group that they were prepared to change direction based on the input from a woman, created a more innovative group as a whole. And I think that's diversity and inclusivity, and and how much it matters. And I think particularly when it comes to innovation, and innovation is what we need.
Okay, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that, Katrine. Now I'd like to turn to Dato Rahman. Maybe you can talk about how you've seen including or incorporating inclusivity in your leadership team at CIMB, or even some of the previous roles that you've held, and how that's actually benefited, even contributed to the bottom line, and where have you seen where corporates have been slow sort of adopt inclusivity? What are the missed opportunities that they may have missed out on?
Yeah, huge. Firstly, this is why I'm particularly proud at CIMB. I think we see diversity as a really critical value within our organization that they will drive success. So I'm very proud, effectively, that on CIMB, apart from, on the gender diversity side, more than 40% of our what we call senior management are women. And not only that, if you look at it, the nature, or basically the roles that the women lead in CIMB are very, what I call, wide-ranging. So we have a CTO, who's a woman. We actually, our bank in Niaga, which is the 5th largest bank in Indonesia, is led by Ibu Lani. Fantastic. And our chief risk officer, which is our so-called HQ role for the whole, basically, group, is also led by a woman, Ibu Vera. And we believe this really is a critical element. So that's gender diversity. The other part that we really believe in is that to be and we are an ASEAN bank, it is extremely important for us to actually have cross-pollination of, I call it ASEAN talent within the organization. So for instance, we have a Singaporean that leads our commercial business. We have a Malaysian that leads our CIMB Thai. And we have an Indonesian that leads our risk practice. And we have an Indian national, but Singapore PR that leads our consumer business. Extremely important for us to actually have. Because I think to run a successful ASEAN financial franchise, you need to actually have what I call cross-pollination of talent across not only gender, but also in terms of background, in terms of profile, in terms of basically of the country. And I think that's the unique DNA about CIMB. As much as we are proud that it is a Malaysian bank, I think one of the key DNA that it has been able to actually to develop is really to be truly an ASEAN bank. And not many, I call it Malaysian company, or even I call it ASEAN company that's been able to be truly ASEAN in that space. And the value is, I mean, we can talk about, I call it impact on bottom line, but the bigger, to me, the simple value is to have a much more nuanced and better decision making. Because the more diversified you are, the less blind spot you actually, don't see. And as well as you have better, what I call discussion, debate from different perspectives. I'm a great believer that when you have a diverse team of leaders or diverse team in any part, you tend to get better quality decision making. Because people come from different perspectives, different experience, different starting point or end goals. And if you are able to do it in, I call it a collaborative manner, in a productive manner, then the results will be much better. And learning from my private equity experience, learning basically from asset management, you see that. And that is why, to me, it's not about it's right for us to be diverse. It is not only right, it really, at the end of the day, results in better outcome, better decisions.
Okay. I guess that's one of the best benefits of being a truly regional bank, is that you get to tap into a much larger and diverse talent pool, which I feel like in Malaysia we're always kind of all gagging for the same small and shrinking talent pool, right? Okay, and now I'd like to turn to Bill. So you talked about, or you mentioned earlier that you made an active decision to make way for one of your team members, and that's why you left your role as CEO. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what have you done, or how have you seen inclusivity benefiting leadership roles in a community?
Well, I can tell you that the Carbon Square community of Boston is an incredibly diverse area. There's probably 30 different countries represented in the 60 or 70,000 people that live in that area. From lots of immigrants from the Caribbean and from Africa and from Vietnam, from all different walks of life. And so one of the things that, as a CEO, what I wanted to do is hire locally, right? In some ways, like, I'm not sure exactly what the healthcare system can do for you, but I know what a job does, and making sure that we give our jobs to local people was a really important element of an economic development strategy for that neighborhood. There's a lot of employees there. There's upwards of 400 people that work there. So hiring local is important. But because it's largely a poor community, it was really difficult to hire senior managers in that. So just, so how do you hire senior managers that are going to get the mission, understand that they have to hire locally and how to interact with it. And I just, I think I told you this story earlier, but just a little trick that I used to do with interviewing senior managers. I'd interview them, and then I'd say, hey, why don't we go for a walk, right? Now, the Carbon Square Business District is a really robust business district filled with immigrant kind of stores, fronts, and all that. And it's also kind of messy. There's always trash on the ground and stuff like that. So I'd go walk out the door with them, and I'd start picking up trash just to see if they would pick up trash, right? It's like, you got to love that community in order to do it. And I also would wait to hear them say something positive or hopeful about the neighborhood. Walking around, it's a really diverse place. There may be some alcoholics or drug addicts like hanging out in a corner or whatever, but tell me something that you like. But I never would prompt it. I would just wait for them to say it. And if they didn't say anything, I wouldn't hire them. And so that was, just you had to get somebody, people that really were tuned into the mission of the organization. And that way you could also enforce this whole thing of, like, okay, what do you mean you can't find a nurse that lives in the neighborhood? Look harder, that kind of thing. And so because of the fact that it was also a community that was started kind of on a line between black people and white people, we wound up becoming a site for the Irish peace process, believe it or not. Protestants and Catholics from Northern Ireland, they kind of got black and white hostility. They kind of understood. In fact, the Catholics thought of Martin Luther King as like one of their heroes. Yeah. But in any case, during the peace process, they would send groups of Protestants and Catholics to work together at the Cobham Square Health Center. So it wasn't Protestant versus Catholic, but they kind of understood the tension that was there, and always there. And so it was interesting. So one of the things that I would do is I'd go over to Ireland and teach a class on how do you manage diversity. Hey, I'm a white guy, right? I'm a white guy in a neighborhood that, when I left, was about 80% non-white. And so how does a white guy kind of deal with that kind of diversity? Well, we made sure that there was a lot of celebrations, first of all. The front of the health center has flags in it, and we would fly a different flag every day of representing the communities that we were serving there, to give them people, oh wow, that's my flag. I'm going to feel comfortable there. And then we would absolutely, this is like kind of rule number one of the Cobham Square Health Center is everyone. You respect everyone. Everyone's there for a reason, and it's all respect. And God help you if you're not respectful of the various people coming in the door. So, so just, little things like that, but also having celebrations. We had a St. Patrick's Day party for the Irish folks that were there, and we had a Jamaican Independence Day and Haitian Flag Day, and all the different groups that we would have there to make sure. And then for Black History Month, we'd all get together, we'd sing the Black National Anthem, all those kinds of things to make sure the people understood that we were there for everybody. And that was something that we had to completely enforce in order for us to be a successful organization. So defining success, as you point out, part of it is that how comfortable does everyone in this very, very diverse, mainly BIPOC community feel coming in the door and feeling like they're getting very high-quality services, especially when some of those groups were getting very, very poor services historically. African Americans have gotten terrible health care in America, generally speaking. This was different. And then, of course, with the schools that were started, the idea was we got to get more BIPOC health professionals and try to hire them. And so that was also important. When I left, there was about 80% non-white staff there, including in all levels of the organization, although in the physician area, it was more weighted towards whites. But in any case, we did a really good job on it. And that was so important. First of all, it's important for that community, but this is the future of America. America is, all the younger people, the babies being born are more likely to be babies of color. And so, we're looking at a future America that is going to be much more diverse. And if we can't handle the diversity of it, we're going to be in very, very deep trouble as a country. So you think globally or locally and, act locally and try to make sure that all those things are happening that would produce a community that, at a minimum, is at peace with itself.
Right. That point about making sure that you celebrate all the different cultural groups, I think that's something in Malaysia that we're quite familiar with. We have many, many cultural public holidays in Malaysia, and we like to celebrate all cultural groups in Malaysia.
And last night's celebration was fabulous, by the way.
Yeah,
it was a
fabulous,
great event.
Yeah.
Okay, so now towards my last question before we take Q&A from the audience. So we talked about the past, we talked about the present. Now, looking towards the future, going back to the title of our session, right? What type of leadership do we need to sort of get through this perfect storm, right? And weather this perfect storm. This perfect storm of rising geopolitical tensions, inflation, stagflation, climate crisis, social unrest, a rising far-right movement in different parts of the world. And one thing that I thought was really interesting about the title of the session, "Oh Captain, My Captain," it comes from a very famous poem by Walt Whitman. And it's really about this captain who basically went through this long journey. It was a very stormy weather, and at the end of sort of weathering through the storm, he dies. And it was really actually inspired by Abraham Lincoln's story, because at the end of the American Civil War, he was assassinated, right? And Abraham Lincoln has always been sort of like a model of leadership, right, through adversity. So I wanted to ask, right, and invite comments from everyone on this panel. What kind of model of leadership do we need to weather this perfect storm going forward? So maybe I'll invite Dr. Rahman first.
listening today, maybe we need a superwoman. I think that's probably, because it's going to be very, very challenging, right? And leadership, and just imagine, right? The world being very uncertain, being very volatile, being very unpredictable, with the themes that any CEO needs to actually to grasp: technological development, the technical choice or technological decisions that needs to be made. Themes like sustainability, etc. It's extremely difficult, I believe, going forward, or extremely challenging for any leaders to really be able to manage all of this, and yet what I call have to execute, have to deliver results. So I think in the future, as I said, we can't find that superwoman. The leader will just need to, I call it, be a leader that understand, focus on a couple of areas that they are strong, but really have the ability to manage, I call it, and be comfortable in manage very, very diverse, talented leaders. Because it's virtually impossible for a leader to do it all, right? To be able to predict what's going to happen, to find ways to actually to mitigate unpredictable events that actually happen, while at the same time, making the technological decision that is need to be made. So my view, really, a leader will then just have to be very, very clear where the areas of the strength that he has, and each style has to be able to really manage a pool of, I call it, very empowered, very capable leaders with the right values. I think that if you are able to actually to do so, I think you can navigate and be able to manage the so-called environment that we actually face. Because otherwise, as I said, in the coming with all the uncertainty, it's going to be very, very challenging world that we are entering into.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Rahman. Now I'd like to invite Katrine to share your views.
Okay. Well, so in traditional economics, we talk about the invisible hand, which is the invisible hand of the market. So the forces of self-interest that sort of come in and sort of create growth and new ideas and hopefully a better life for a lot of people through self-interest. And in feminist economics, we often talk about that it's not just about the invisible hand of the market, but also the invisible heart, right? So which is, all of these other things that you need for an organization, a country, a planet, an economy to actually function and work in the longer run. And I do think a leadership model for what we are in right now really requires a much better balance between the invisible hand and the invisible heart. And I think also because we are in a I don't even know what we're in, but we're in something where there's a lot of crises that are tied together in all sorts of complex ways. It really, really requires of everyone, I think, to be able to see the larger picture and what's at stake and see our own part in that. So it's really kind of a holistic thinking that I think is required of us, and particularly when it comes to, what some people call climate change, but, it's better named everything change, which is, what we have to steer this planet through in the next coming decades, and everything that requires of us. That would be my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you for that, Katrine. And lastly, Bill, would you like to share your thoughts?
Sure. It's a scary world, and I think that we need to act as a world.
Yeah.
I mean, this is one of the things I have learned over the last 2 days, is that there's just so much commonality in what we all are working with and thinking about and problems that we're dealing with. And if we can't really stick together on some of these issues, whether it be climate change or standing against autocracies and that kind of thing, it's going to make for a world in which we go from war to war, which unfortunately is kind of what we've been doing. And that's a really scary thought, because that prevents the kind of collaboration that's necessary for us to solve the world's problems, which are just going to get worse, even if we're able to get control of carbon. It's going to take a while before we even stabilize the world. So overall, to me, introducing people to the fact that we're in this together. We are a world, not a country, and having us share this kind of information like this. I mean, I've been inspired by this event. The folks that were up here, the Malaysians that were up here, just like, oh my God, amazing work that's being done. But it's also kind of stuff that I hear about in our own country, in the United States of America and all that. So, I mean, there's so much that's going on that where we could share and do a better job and all that. And having events like this is very, very helpful, including to me. And I've been around, but I think that that we have an opportunity to try to change the trajectory and make sure that our world is kept safe. But it's going to require good people to stick together and make the case in our own communities.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bill. So I agree. I think we have a lot more in common than we think, and the world is a lot smaller than we believe as well. Okay, so we're approaching the last 10 minutes of our panel session. So I'd like to open up the panel to questions from the audience. All right, so I think we have one up here in the front row. Oh, or
One in the back, too.
And one at the back. So maybe we'll take the one in front first, and then the one at the back. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Arvin from Zico. So we have a brilliant panel here, a good session, with very different backgrounds, very different experience you carry. Now, we spoke about visions and implementation and innovation, but my question is, recently we see a trend or a plague, for lack of a better word, in the workforce, which is called quiet quitting, which is then, in response, there's quiet firing. Now, I'm personally a firm believer of Ikigai, but I would like to know your thoughts and your experience on this, if any. Thank you.
Right, so quiet quitting is really the idea that people are moving away from the hustle. Quiet quitting and quiet firing. Maybe you can share with us what is quiet firing.
Okay. So quiet quitting is something which is going around online mostly these days, and what it is employees saying that if the employers are not remunerating you or not giving you what you seek, then just do the bare minimum and just go with the flow. Yeah. That's quiet quitting. So you don't quit the job per se, but you just don't do anything extra, just bare minimum. And then there's quiet firing, which on the other end, vice versa.
I think that's Rahman. Go ahead first. I think he directed it to you.
I think there seems to be like this worldwide shortage of employees, and also the big quit, right, or whatever it is, the big resignation that's obviously happened as well, but especially happened in the service sector, whether that's the physicians and nurses and all that sector, or the teachers or whatever, stuff that I am deeply involved in. All of that is going through some turmoil right now, and it seems as though the leadership community of businesses, nonprofits, and all that are really not all that clear on where they need to go in order to preserve it. What I'm recommending, I'm on 14 boards of directors, all volunteer. It would be nice to have one that paid, but nonetheless, 14 boards of directors, and I'm chair of 3. And so I've been asked this, what do we do? What do we do by leadership on there? And I think it's, for me, re-engaging our staffs to be able to rethink how they do their jobs, how we do it, especially in the service sector, is a really important element of it. It's kind of re-strategic planning. Let's throw out the old strategic plan. Let's think about a different way in which we can do this that makes people feel very, very comfortable about it. So, because it's going to cost a hell of a lot more money to replace everybody, right? So, you know, you go out there and find somebody, train them, and all that kind of stuff, forget it. It's very, very, very costly. But I probably has nothing to do with the question you asked, but nonetheless, it was the only thing that I could come up with.
No, Bill, but I'm equally perplexed with what is happening as well. This whole quiet firing, I mean, Dr. Rahman.
Yeah, my belief, I'm always, the most important value that I always ascribe to is passion, right? And I believe passion deliver excellence, passion deliver, you know, great results, and it needs to work both ways, right? It needs to, both as an individual, you need to be passionate about the work that you do. If you feel that effectively the work that you're not doing, basically, you want to do the bare minimum, then to me, I think, you know, you lost that passion for the work. So to my mind, it's better for individuals, if you can't find passion in your existing role, find something else that you're passionate about. And for organization, if the individuals or the employees that work for you do not exhibit the passion to actually to deliver excellence, it's really then you have failed as an organization. So in my mind, effectively, is right, whatever we do, and this on an individual basis, I'm a great believer that you must be passionate to be doing the work that you are doing. If you're not, I always believe that find something that fuels that passion. Otherwise, I don't think you'll be happy. I don't think you'll be delivering, I call it, results or make you be satisfied. I think human nature wants to be inspired, wants to do great stuff, and wants to basically to deliver. So that's my belief. And so, you know, if there's a team, or I think it's a failure for both the organization as well as the individual in not generating the right environment to create that passion to work and deliver your best.
Thank you, Dr. Rahman. We have a question at the back, number 4.
Hi, good evening. My name is Mei Yi. Thank you so much for the panel. So I think despite the fact that you guys have shared so much with us, I don't think we're anywhere close to plumbing the depths of your experience. So aligned with what Khazanah is doing, giving away books, I'd like to ask for recommendations of 2 or 3 books on leadership that you have read that have deeply influenced you that you would like to recommend to the audience. Thank you.
Round robin. Book recommendations.
I'll give it a shot. I mean, I've never read a book about leadership specifically, but I can tell you that Nelson Mandela's Long Road to Freedom, I think it's his autobiography, is an incredibly inspirational story about leadership, but you know, without being basically a history or an autobiographical book. But I think for me, if you want to be inspired and all that about somebody who's just totally mission-oriented and was able to produce a country in the process, that to me is the most valuable book for me.
Okay. Anyone else would like to share?
Yeah, I'll just quote the most recent book that I read, and it's not a pitch for McKinsey, but McKinsey just came out with a book by their partners called CEO Excellence. So if you really like to read about, and they did what I call very detailed analysis of the leaders that actually make or generate effectively outperformance. And what are the traits effectively that these leaders actually have that results in that so-called outperformance. So that's one book. I can't remember the author, but you can Google effectively. It's a new book by the McKinsey partners, CEO Excellence.
Okay, and Katrine?
Well, there's a recently new book. It's a novel about climate change called Ministry for the Future, which I think might not be like technically the best written novel in the world, but it is. I think it's required reading for everyone who wants to lead in the coming decades, because it envisions. We were talking about science fiction earlier today. It envisions a world 20, 25 years from now where sort of climate change have sort of turned into a really catastrophic event, and it's a version of the world trying to grapple with this in terms of leadership and political leadership and institutional leadership. And if you read that book, it's sort of one of these that is just, it doesn't leave you, because it really shows the scale of the challenge ahead and uses sort of the imagination of, it's science fiction, but also it's very, it's just 25 years or so from now, so it's not far away. And it's something that I would wish for leaders on all levels to have read.
Okay, great. You can head over to Kinokuniya to pick up some of those books if you're interested. Any more questions from the audience? If not, do we have any questions online? Virtually? Okay. Okay, so the first question from Anonymous. Adam Smith never got married. His mom cooked his dinners. I wonder what Katrine's views are on marriage and advice to parents of sons.
Okay.
Yes,
I think there's somebody. Yeah. Okay. Well, anybody else needs marriage advice? Free. No, so I think that's a reference to my first book,
yes.
Who Cooked Adam Smith's Dinner. So the founding father of economics, Adam Smith, never got married, and he lived with his mother, who looked after the household for him, and he had also had a cousin who looked after the finances, because he was not very good at that either. Parents of sons. So I have a son. He's called Arthur. He's 6 years old. Well, with sons, I think we are quite good at. We're getting a lot better to sort of. I have 2 daughters too. I mean, I think we're quite good at encouraging our daughters to be sort of, traditionally male and, go out and get it and, go for it and be tough and climb to the top of the thing.
Lean in.
Yeah, I think it's still more controversial to sort of encourage our sons to kind of embrace more traditional female sides of themselves, sort of, the soft and all of these things, and the vulnerable, and teaching them about the need to build relationships, and and how you do that. And so I try to do that, but I also play nights with him and guns and all of that stuff in the garden. So it's which I do with my daughters too. So I think it's about balance.
Okay, thank you for the advice.
Yeah,
Katrine.
you're welcome.
Okay, any more questions from online? No? Okay. What must Malaysia do differently when it comes to talent to navigate the perfect storm? I'd like to maybe direct this question to Dato Rahman.
Tough. trying to figure out an intelligent answer. So easy. I think Malaysia has the talent, and I've I'm sure all of us have met, and even during the KMF, the talent that Malaysian actually have is amazing. And I think we are known of exporting our talents, and all our talents are doing well. So to me, effectively, Malaysia is not about the talent. It's all about how can we harness and get the talent to actually work and really contribute and harness it effectively in the right way. My belief, and I met basically either through CIMB, our graduate scholars, or etc. And all the talents in Malaysia is amazing. We just need to create the right environment for talent wanting to actually first to be in Malaysia, second knows that their input or their contribution are valued, and give them opportunity. I think one thing, and this is probably I'd like to end with this, right? Myself and probably the colleagues or what I call my cohort of corporate Malaysia were given the trust of effectively at probably at a very early age when we are not ready yet to lead organization in Malaysia. And somehow I think we lost that ability to provide that trust. I mean, if you look at politically, right, the individuals that are still involved are still the individuals that have been in the past. So perhaps Malaysia, I think it's probably, the question is much more of to have that trust, to give it to the younger talent, because I believe we give that trust with the talent that they have, the skill sets, the experience, or not even the experience, the qualification and the ability to think, innovate, I believe will do much, much better place. So perhaps trust, we need to give them trust. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Rahman. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our panel session. I'd really, really, truly appreciate all the thoughts and comments that all of our distinguished panel members have shared today. And I hope that it's given everyone some food for thought in terms of how to navigate sort of the stormy weathers of the next few years, but also about your own leadership stories in the future. Thank you so much.